It's impossible to understand what we call mental ill health unless we can also understand the negative or detrimental effect of society, or the positive effect of society in creating mental ill health. If we don't understand the contributory aspect of society, of the group of other human beings that we live with and cooperate with, then inevitably what's going to happen is that when someone is suffering from mental ill health, all fingers are going to point to that individual. So this is really the structure versus agency argument, which is well known in sociology. So whenever it was in the late 70s or 80s or sometime like that, there was this debate going on about structure versus agency. And it was pertinent to more than just academic circles, because law and order, as always, was a big issue there in politics. And the government of the day, headed by Mrs. Thatcher, was favouring the agency model. And the agency model states that if you or I commit a crime, we do so entirely out of our own agency. We didn't have to. We choose to. We're the chooser. There's no external forces contributing to the fact that we commit a crime. So any right-wing government's going to jump at this because it allows us the immediate opportunity or possibility of doing something about crime. And when we look at things from the agency point of view, what we do about crime is very, very simple. We punish the agent, teach them a lesson, they won't do it again. So all the badness is contained within that one individual, so we just punish that individual as much as we can. And then that solves the problem, because we don't have to look anywhere else for causes. So that's very, very simplistic, but that's never put politicians off, because the point isn't to do justice to a subtler reality. The point is to motivate voters to vote. And voters love to see clear-cut answers and problems that can be solved in a very straightforward, vigorous way by dealing out short, sharp shocks to offenders. So we get a good feeling out of that. It's like, not only do we naturally enjoy the prospect of offenders being given a short, sharp shock, we also are right to do that, because this is the right thing to do, because that's the whole agency model. Structuralism in this context means that crime is inherent in the very structure of society, and the emphasis we put on commodities and consuming, and also the necessary differential that exists in relation to power, or in relation to the power to consume. So we're all under pressure to consume, but only some of us can, because only some of us have the power to consume, because it's a pyramid structure and only a very small percentage of people have the power or have the money, whichever way you want to look at it. Those at the top of the pyramid. So this unfair situation, because it is unfair from the point of view of the 90% of people who are at the bottom end of the power pyramid and don't have any power worth speaking of, would try and take matters into their own hands in the only way that they can. And since the perception in our society is that our well-being is served by consuming, they will consume without, in what is considered an illegitimate way. They might rob or commit fraud or something like that. But that is inherent in the very nature, according to the structuralist point of view, that's inherent in the very nature of society. Which means if we really wanted to do something about it, and that's a very big if, we wouldn't try punishing those individuals. Fun as it is to punish people, we would look at the whole of society and see what needs to change there, which, needless to say, no society has ever shown any tendency to do that. We always look for scapegoats, of course. And the very same thing is true in the field of mental health. We can look at mental health in terms of an agency paradigm or a structuralist paradigm. And the agency paradigm is exactly the same as I was describing for the law and order scenario, that it is all located in the agent or the actual person. The fault is entirely there, although we don't use the word fault because we're not going to blame people for being mentally unwell, but we'll say the cause is entirely in the individual, whether it's their thinking or their genetics or whatever the hell it is, it's in them. And that informs our whole way of looking at mental unwellness. And as many people have pointed out, a whole industry now exists on the back of that paradigm. So the good thing about the agency paradigm, it straight away gives us a way of dealing with it, an indicated course of action, correct the fault in the individual, whether it's through whatever means, fixing type therapies, medication, whatever the hell it is. All efforts are concentrated on the individual. And how much effort is concentrated on looking at society? Well, clearly, none at all. All the effort's gone into looking at the individual agent. Plus, if we did start widening the net and looking at the whole of society instead of just the individual who happens to be suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever it is, then there's no business that can benefit from that. There's no professional bodies that can benefit from it. There's no money to be made in that. It certainly doesn't help. It doesn't help all the specialists, because specialists are specialists. They're specializing in looking on the very, very small scale. So what good is a specialist when it comes to apprehending the systematic errors in the group as a whole, society as a whole? Then that's not their field. They'd have to suddenly widen out. They'd have to completely start. It's as if they'd have to have a totally different job and stop looking down a microscope at everything. And that's no good, because obviously, all their training is towards their specialism. It's not going to go down well. And the industries that make money from looking at how to target the individual, they're not going to do well, because if we start looking at society and saying, okay, the actual problem is in the structure, the inherent structure of a whole society, then the drug companies and all the professional bodies that are thriving on the back of the agency type paradigm can be seen as part of that systematic problem. So what profit is there in that? Beforehand, it's like, oh, we're doing a good job helping people. Feel good about that. And in the second case, when we turn it all around, it's, oh, we're part of the problem. So that doesn't feel so good. That isn't so good. So very obviously, that suddenly taking structuralism on board is not really on the cards, and it doesn't seem to be happening particularly, despite lip service that is paid. Like, we do understand, we're not stupid, we do know that society has a role to play, and that there's forces and factors in society that are making us unwell, but we still minimize it, and we minimize it by saying, well, you can learn skills to enable you to manage the anxiety, manage the stress, manage the anger. And we love doing that. We love anger management courses, stress management courses, etc. Especially corporations love it. And as has been pointed out, the reason they love it is because they don't have to change, you have to change. They create a stressful environment. You have to learn the skills to cope with that stressful environment. They don't have to do anything. They're not going to change the environment. And it's the same with society. All the emphasis is on anger management, anxiety management, etc., because it's us that's got to somehow be better at coping with this untenable situation. And even though that's simple enough once it's pointed out, it doesn't stop the institutions from applying that logic every single time and harping on about stress management. As if, and the implicit thing here is that the deficit lies in our ability to deal with it. So again, it's our fault. The finger is pointing at us. So we could say, okay, let's forget about the agency approach for a while, because it certainly doesn't seem to be working at all, which is one thing that we can be perfectly clear about. There's no way the mental health of the population is responding to the agency approach. But then again, it was never supposed to. The whole thing wasn't about being accurate. It's about facilitating some theatrical performance in which we are seen to be tackling the problem. Whether we are or not, it's another matter entirely. Because if you have got this huge big edifice of mental health care injuries in which we are seen to be tackling the problem, then the question of actually saying that the whole damn thing is wrong, it's too big a thing to swallow. If you go around saying that, people will look at you and think, here's another nut job, here's another complainer, here's another conspiracy nut. You'll be written off because no one can criticize the whole system like that without being thought of as an oddball, without people thinking, yeah, that's your own kind of issue. Maybe it's a phase you're going through. Maybe you've got a father complex, a negative father complex, oppositional deviance behavior or something like that. Because the system can't ever be wrong. And for all of us that are 100% bought into that system, we can't be wrong either, and the system can't be wrong, and we can't be wrong. But society, if we were to look at it, if we had the ability to look at it in a dispassionate way and see what socialization does to us and see what society does to us, we'd see that the whole thing is pretty much like a factory assembly line. So we get popped onto the assembly line pretty much unformed. And I know this has been said millions of times before, but it still does clarify this whole business of what society does to contribute to our mental ill health. And so we're like putty or clay, and then these big stamps, these come down and mold us into a particular shape. And then we carry on down the belt, the conveyor belt. And then a bit later, there's the product checkers, making sure if the programming has it taken, has it not taken? The imprinting's taken place, but every now and again there's going to be a unit and it hasn't quite taken place properly. So then they throw those off they throw them into the waste disposal basket. So they take off units that haven't been molded properly. So that corresponds to the educational system. Not being molded properly corresponds to not having conformed enough, or perhaps not having been able to conform enough by the way that we are to swallow all the stuff we're supposed to swallow and regurgitate all the stuff we're supposed to regurgitate in exams. All of which is to prove that we have been effectively conditioned more than anything else. And if we haven't been effectively conditioned, we don't get certified, then we can't get any status or position in society where we'd be listened to, because what's the point of listening to someone who hasn't been conditioned properly? And we'll have to do work whereby we're just struggling to make do the whole time. So we won't have any time really to do much about anything. So our identity is spoiled by that. We become third-rate citizens, really. We're no longer professional class. We don't ever get to be professional classes. And that's all down to conditioning. We might think it's down to something else. Innate ability or intelligence or any of this type of idea that the ones who succeed deserve to succeed. But that isn't the case. What society values is people who can buy into its values without questioning them. That's what every organization loves, after all. You'll get promoted then. And if you don't buy into it all 100%, then the system will very quickly spot you. And you won't get promoted, you'll get sidelined. Happens in every single organization, happens all the time. Individual thinkers don't make the grade. So most human beings, when they go on the assembly line, do get programmed, do get conditioned effectively, and then off they pop, hopping off the assembly line, and the impression is given, and it's widely said, the world is your oyster. You know, you can make the type of life that you want to. You can be anything you want. Just get out there and follow your dreams and have a great life. But the thing is, it's all very well saying that, but the thing is that once we do hop off the assembly line after we've been conditioned, it's no good telling us to do whatever we want, because we don't know what we want then. We only know what the conditioning wants, or I only know what the conditioned version of myself wants. And what the conditioned version of myself wants is what the conditioning has told me to want, which I think is what I really do want. So we all know that kind of thing. So the type of freedom I have there is the freedom to be a slave, the freedom to carry on acting out my programming. No matter which direction I walk off in, no matter what jobs I get or what position in society I get, it's all me acting out my conditioning, which has been put into me. So at that particular point when we have been conditioned, molded, given a way of understanding ourselves and a way of understanding what life is all about, society doesn't have to worry about us anymore. It can afford to let us go off on our own, like a toy soldier, because we're not going to go off on our own. At that point, we can only ever see things in the way that we have been made to see them. And I know I'm labouring the point there, but it's kind of an amazing point, really. Really, to succeed in societal terms is the worst of all things in terms of our own actual well-being, because there's no well-being in being a successful slave who doesn't know they're a slave. So that brings us to the question of, well, how do these societal forces produce mental ill health. What's the mechanism here? And very simply, the mechanism is that we have been divorced from our true nature, and we have been made to be what we're not, and our range of vision or view as to what life could be has been narrowed so much that it's exactly the same as everyone else's. And so instead of saying that, well, life is your oyster and the horizons are wide indeed and you can go anywhere you want, that isn't the case at all, because we have to live out our lives in this very, very narrow, artificial, pseudo world, which isn't life at all. It's just the societal game. So what we're talking about there is kind of fundamental restriction, fundamental limitation, which is blocking or obstructing or oppressing the actual nature of who we are. And the actual nature of who we are can't be obstructed and blocked and oppressed and denied and rerouted without consequences. When we start messing around with the actual nature of who we are, which is no longer able to make its own way like a river coming down from the mountains, racing along whichever way it wants to. We've been diverted, the river's been dammed, and we've been diverted into a system of canals, and the whole point of our existence in this case is to power the machinery that feeds off the potential energy in the moving water. So our whole lives have no other purpose but apart from maintaining the machinery of society, which we wouldn't do if we were free and if we were the way that we actually are, because we wouldn't have time for that nonsense, that restriction type nonsense. Why would we? The very idea is appalling, to be puttering around in a small corner of some tiny little room that doesn't even really properly exist when the whole world is out there. So why would we? But the fact remains that the use that our lives are put to is maintaining the system, turning the paddle wheels, driving the turbines. So we're under pressure to do that. So we might be feeling stressed, and the stress is really because we're being used to power the system, really, which is kind of similar to the film The Matrix. And it's an old idea. But to see things in this way shows society in a different light. We start to realize that there's a whole new side to society. And the argument about is it agency, is it structuralism? Well, probably if you explored this a bit more, you would come down pretty firmly on the side of it's kind of structuralism, really. Okay, thanks for watching.